Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the Guilty as Charged podcast. My name is Steven, and I am the host as always. Usually here with Tyler or one of the Alexes, but I'm doing a little solo video today for you guys. Tyler is out traveling back from Las Vegas, where he spent New Year's with his lovely aunt and uncle up there who hosted us during the draft that year. So always appreciate that side of the family and for welcoming us so much when we were in Vegas, back 3 years ago now, which is kind of crazy since it's 2025. But yeah, happy to be here, excited to be here and break down what I think is one of the most ridiculous Pro Bowl snubs of all time in Daiyan Henley, certainly in my lifetime as a Chargers fan. And then we'll get into some things from the Raiders week as well. But I'm not gonna lie, Dayon was like the main reason of making this video, so we'll dive into it. Big congratulations to the Chargers players who did obviously make the Pro Bowl, being Rashawn, Slater, Derwin, James, and Khalil Mack. I think all three of those guys really deserved the opportunity there to showcase their talents in that regard. And I know it's not the same as it used to be. I know people will say, the Pro Bowl sucks, and that is true from like a game standpoint. Like I'm not going to sit here and complain about this and talk about that and then go watch the flag football and skills challenges. Like I'm just not going to do that. But the from a player perspective, the Pro Bowl still matters from a financial contractual standpoint, as well as a potential Hall of Fame resume standpoint. So the fact that Khalil Mack has made his ninth Pro Bowl, that's going to matter as it compares to his potential Hall of Fame resume. He's kind of talked about the Super Bowl being kind of the last thing, and hopefully the Chargers are able to win that for him and kind of put the stamp on that Hall of Fame career. But like the Hall of Fame committee looks at Pro Bowl nominations, so it's a thing that matters to players more than it does the fans. I wish the game mattered, but it is what it is. Jordan Schultz pointed out that if you are a first round pick and you've made X amount of Pro Bowls, then that helps your fifth round option tag be a lot higher, right? So financially speaking, there's a big incentive as well. Rashawn Slater, for example, if his fifth year option were next year as opposed to this year, next year's fifth year option would be much higher as opposed to this year being his second Pro Bowl. So again, congratulations to him and the rest of the Chargers who made it. Bunch of Pro Bowl alternates for the Chargers. Cameron Dicker and Darius Davis on the specialists, I believe, are first or second alternates. And then Joe Alt, Justin Herbert, Joey Bosa, Bradley Bozeman, Nick Neiman, Scott Matlock, and Ladd McConkey are also alternates. I think a few players would have to opt out for each of them to potentially make it. But it sounds like potentially Cameron Dicker and Darius Davis could end up going to the Pro Bowl as well. But again, alternates are not surprised. The player who I did not mention was obviously Daiyan Henley, who we'll get to in a second here, but of course have to pay the bills and tell you guys about our friends over at Prize Picks, the best and easiest way to consume daily fantasy sports. You see the logo in the video, you see the link in the description, or if you are listening to this, the link is also in there. Prizepicks.com/guilty to take part in the best and easiest way to consume daily fantasy sports. We cannot thank them enough for all of their support and partnership across the last 2 years for the Guilty as Charged podcast, and really grateful for everything that they have continued to contribute to our show, as well as the Blue Wire Network, of course. Really is such a smooth, easy, user-friendly way to use daily fantasy sports. I've talked about this, over and over again, but I genuinely, being a part of Prize Picks has made me outright stop playing regular fantasy football. And I don't, do regular gambling. It's just way more fun, easier to uphold for Prize Picks. And Week 18 is a perfect example of this because you have all of these players who are not going to be playing in Week 18. So Saquon Barkley, Patrick Mahomes. We'll see what happens with like J.K. Dobbins, for example. All these players who you're just a little uncertain about. Well, you don't have to play them. Your fantasy championship does not depend on these players playing Week 18. You can still get in on the action. if you're really passionate about maybe a Taylor Heineke stat here, I don't know if he's going to be on the segment, but if Justin Herbert does not play, then Taylor Heineke, maybe you're really passionate about his rushing prop, for example, you can go in and select that. So it's a great way to get in on the fantasy world without all the hassle of regular fantasy. Daily fantasy is where it's at, in my opinion, and Prize Picks is the best way to do that. Using the link prizepicks.com/guilty does genuinely help support the show. So we do encourage you guys to check it out. If you haven't yet, make sure to tell a friend. All that good stuff really does help the Guilty as Charged podcast. Again, that is prizepicks.com/guilty. All right, let's get into the Daiyan Henley conversation. And then, like I mentioned, we'll also talk about some of the Raiders stuff. I do want to bring this up from our friends of the show, Karen Garcia and Daniel Lay. They were the ones who organized the meetup after this past game at the Bolt, and they are going to be doing it again this upcoming week after the Raiders game. My understanding is that is going to happen win or lose, but they will confirm details on Sunday, January 5th, which, fun fact, is my birthday. And hopefully anybody that is in the area can go out and make it out. So it's going to be a little bit of a different setup because the Chargers are not going to be flying back from New England. They're going to be flying back from Vegas. So it should be much earlier in the night. I know this past week that happened at like 10:30, 11 p.m. at night. And for most of you, that probably is a little unrealistic. So since the team is going to be flying back from Las Vegas, it will be much earlier in the night. So hopefully you guys can go. The link in the flyer is also going to be put in our description for you guys to track and find details. You can also follow both of those two on Twitter for more details. Daniel A is the Dean Thanos character who does a great job, supporting the team and making fun of people who don't. But that's Daniel A. He's a great fan, season ticket holder. We have sat next to him at games, can vouch for his character. And Karen Garcia obviously is fantastic as well. Longtime supporter of the show. We've gone out of our way to hang out with her when we're down in LA. So we really, really appreciate her, and Karen's fantastic. So those two are your go-to information for the meetup after the Raiders game. If I were down there, I would go, but I'm not. So hopefully you guys that are in the area can go and take advantage. All right, let's talk about Daiyan Henley. So he did not make the Pro Bowl, which I guess is not necessarily a surprise. What is a surprise is that he's not even an alternate to the Pro Bowl. When it comes to the actual Pro Bowl starters, you have Roquan Smith from the Baltimore Ravens and Zaire Franklin from the Indianapolis Colts, who is in the news this week, kind of leading the charge when it comes to the horrible culture and locker room and standards that are going on with the Indianapolis Colts, a Colts team that just got destroyed by a terrible New York Giants football team. So love the fact that that guy and that team is getting represented in the Pro Bowl. And again, even if it's not the game that counts, it matters. So that's super cool. When it comes to the statistical comparisons, I have a good amount of numbers here that kind of show you where the impact these players are making. Zaire does have a tackle advantage over everybody else. He leads the league in tackles. He's got 165 tackles, 10 tackles for loss, which is, good for him, I guess. But we've seen that specific scheme really kind of, if you're a pretty decent linebacker, you can put up numbers in a Gus Bradley, system as we have seen as Chargers fans. 142 total tackles for Daiyan, 144 total tackles for Roquan, 4 for loss for Roquan, 7 for loss for Daiyan. And then you look at the PFF grades, and I know that these are subjective, and I know that they're not for everybody. But you have a 70.1 total defense grade for Daiyan, 64 run defense, 73 coverage, which we'll get to in a second. But coverage is it's the main selling point, I would say, for Daiyan over anybody else in the Pro Bowl kind of conversation. 65.3 total defense grade for Roquan, 72.4 run defense, 59 coverage. That's supposed to say coverage there. And then Zaire, 58 total defense, 71 run defense, 45.7 coverage. So you can kind of get an idea based off of some of these numbers what the players are like. And that's really my goal here. So you have 13 total pressures, 1 sack, 5 QB hits for Daiyan, 10 pressures, 1 sack, 3 QB hits for Roquan. I forgot to add it for Zaire, so let me do that really quickly and amend that. So that is my mistake. I don't want to restart this kind of conversation, so I'm just going to do it right now. So let's see, Zaire Franklin on the Colts has 13 total pressures, 3 sacks, and 1 QB hit. So apologies for not having that on the actual slideshow. That is my bad. But again, Zaire Franklin, 13 total pressures, 3 sacks, and 1 quarterback hit. So pretty similar numbers when it comes to pressures. Obviously, Daiyan has hit the quarterback the most with the 1 sack and 5 hits. None of them are really like, destroying the other in that kind of conversation. But then, like I mentioned, coverage is where Daiyan is really going to sell out. Daiyan Henley has been targeted the most of any linebacker in the AFC. And he's also the only linebacker in the AFC that has generated negative EPA per play, according to Next Gen Stats from Benjamin Solak. So he is genuinely impacting and changing games as a coverage defender. Again, 80 targets for a linebacker is kind of insane. Roquan has been targeted 55 times, Zaire Franklin 75, but that's kind of more of a total snap things. So Daiyan has allowed 60 receptions, 543 yards, 9.1 per reception, just 1 touchdown, and has forced 9 incompletions, has a passer rating when targeted of 97. Roquan, 55 targets, 44 receptions, allowed 466 yards, 10.6 per reception, 0 touchdowns, 3 forced incompletions, 94.4 passer rating when targeted. So Roquan's no slouch there, although some people have argued that this is kind of a down year for Roquan from a coverage standpoint, but he's a very similar body type to Daiyan, and so those numbers being kind of similar, it would make sense. Zaire Franklin is actively bad in coverage, as you can see by the coverage grade. 75 targets, 66 receptions allowed, 664 yards allowed, 10.1 per, 3 touchdowns, 3 forced incompletions, and a passer rating of targeted of 105.8. So I guess my question for the voters here, and so Dan was first in fan voting, by the way. I should have said that first. And the Pro Bowl nominations are decided, 33% by the fan vote, 33% from players, 33% from coaches. So you get the combination of all of those 3 sources, and that's who is decided in the Pro Bowl nomination. So the fact that Daiyan was first in fan voting and didn't get in, it shows that the players and the coaches did not respect his game enough, in my opinion, which is bizarre because you look at the tape, you look at the numbers that I have on the screen, and they're very comparable with a guy like Roquan Smith who did make it. And again, I know Roquan has the reputation. I know Roquan has the better team and things like that. And I get it. Like, I'm not really here to gripe about comparing him to Roquan. But having Zaire Franklin make this feels like people looked at, by people, I'm saying like the coaches and the players, they looked at the tackle number and said, yeah, that guy should get in. Like, that's how it feels to me, because this is a player who, if you polled all of these people who gave their votes, hey, who's the best player on the Colts defense? Who are the players who should get in on the Colts defense? They're probably not going to say Zaire Franklin first. So they went out of their way to vote for this guy. Again, despite all of the noise that he's making from a culture standpoint right now, the Colts are not a playoff team. The Chargers are a playoff team. So I question why Zaire Franklin makes it over a guy like Daiyan Henley. Frankly, Zaire shouldn't have made it over the first alternate either, and that person is Nick Bolton. So Nick Bolton is the first alternate. If the Ravens make the Super Bowl, then Nick Bolton probably gets represented, and that's fine. If it were Roquan and Nick Bolton and Daiyan Henley were the first alternate behind those two, I would have no issues, really, to be completely honest with you, because, again, those are 2 of the very well-established linebackers in the league. Playoffs, etc., contenders, all that stuff, that checks out. Zaire Franklin, to me, has, like, this. There's no reason for this. There's no reason for voters, players, and coaches to go out of their way to put a guy like Zaire Franklin in the Pro Bowl like they did. Again, the tackle numbers are cool, but this is not going to be a player, in my opinion, that is going to rank super highly in terms of inside linebackers. This is a game changer. This is a Fred Warner type. That's just not the case from a statistical standpoint, from a film standpoint. I'm not going to sit in here and pretend like I'm a huge Colts film watcher by any means, but those coverage grades are pretty brutal. And it's not like he's making a super strong impact from a passer standpoint. He's got a lot of missed tackles as well. I forgot to mention that earlier. 21 missed tackles on the season, so it's not like he is the most sure-handed tackler. So Zaire Franklin making it over Daiyan, over Nick Bolton, I think is a mistake. That being said, Daiyan Henley is also not even an alternate, and he's not even an alternate over Leo Chenal, who objectively is a sick football player. I love watching Leo Chenal play, unfortunately for us. But Leo Chenal is the last alternate for the linebacker position. He has 55 total tackles, which is 2 more than Troy Dye, who has been the Chargers' 4th linebacker, at times 5th linebacker on the season. He has 4 tackles for loss. He has played on the season 555 snaps fewer than Daiyan Henley. He has 22 total stops fewer than Daiyan Henley. He has been targeted 15 times all year long. He basically is not used as a coverage player at all. He is a run defense player, and then he's a pass rush player. That is his role for the Chiefs, and he's pretty good at it. That being said, despite his larger pass rush role, he plays as a legit edge rusher from time to time. His pass rush productivity rating of 6.4 is basically half that of Dan Henley's, who's 12.1. Again, 181 of his 407 snaps have come along the defensive line. This to me is not even like a real linebacker. This is a guy who is a specialist. He is not a true off-ball linebacker, and he is the last alternate of the Pro Bowl over Daiyan Henley. Makes no sense to me. It makes no sense to me. Again, I totally understand why Daiyan is not a Pro Bowl starter. That's fine with me. But to have a guy like Leo Chenal as an alternate over Daiyan is such a slap in the face of what this process is supposed to be like. There's no way a coach can sit down and watch Leo Chenal and watch Daiyan Henley and go, yeah, man, Leo Chenal, he should be a higher ranked player than Daiyan Henley. It is completely unjustified. It is something that I think should be amended immediately. We don't know the rest of the alternates at this point in time. I scoured the internet. The Chiefs were the only team that submitted a alternate list outside of the Chargers that I could find. So we know that Nick Bolton is first. We know that Leo Chenal is 5th, but we don't know the rest of that. So it's unfortunate that the coaches and the players decided to go with a role player who's not even the second best linebacker on his team. That's Drew Tranquil. So it's extremely frustrating. Again, I don't want to make this like a bigger deal than it is. We don't know if Daiyan Henley is going to be like a future Hall of Fame player, but he has absolutely earned the right to be represented in this game. At minimum, he has earned the right to be an alternate player. And I think it is ridiculous that he is not even an alternate when guys who are backup players on their team are making the list over him. So it's something that I really, really wish were amended. The Chargers have some other alternate players who, frankly, I don't understand how it's possible. Bradley Bozeman, all due respect, he should not be an alternate, center Pro Bowl nominated kind of player. Joey Bosa, again, I am potentially the biggest Joey Bosa fan on the internet right now. And him being a Pro Bowl alternate, I think is also kind of ridiculous. So it's a big disappointment for me. I feel like, when you look at the Chargers roster as a whole, I think there's a real argument that Daiyan Henley has been the 5th or 6th best player on the team all season long. When you talk about Justin Herbert and then the 3 players who did make the Pro Bowl, those guys are obviously ahead of Daiyan. And then you get into kind of the conversation of Ladd versus Daiyan. Then you get into the conversation of like Poona Ford versus Daiyan, then Joe Alt versus Daiyan, etc. And I think Daiyan would have a really good argument to hedge those players out and be the 5th best player on the roster right now. So I don't know if I would like cement that. I kind of think I would probably go with Joe Alt, and then Daiyan versus Ladd is a really interesting kind of conversation. And I wish I wish all of these players were nominated, but the two rookies, I understand why they were not nominated, but at least they are alternates. So yeah, man, the fact that Dayon's not even an alternate, it really grinds my gears. Again, I understand Pro Bowl is not the same thing, but it's really frustrating. All right, a brief preview of the Raiders game, and then we'll head out for today. The Raiders obviously have nothing to play for. They have won the last two games despite being in the possibility for the number one overall pick. The Chargers, we don't really know what they are going to be playing for. Jim Harbaugh and everybody has said that they are going to try and win the game, even if they know that the seed that they want, which is the 5 seed, is not a possibility. So the Steelers and Bengals will play on Saturday night, which means the Chargers would be able to know what kind of seed they are playing for heading into the game on Sunday afternoon. But Jim Harbaugh was on the Bill Belichick podcast this week with I forget the host name, but it's through NFL Network. He was saying that it's difficult for him and coaches to look other players in the eye and saying, like, we care about you, we don't care about you, you're going to play, you're not going to play. I would expect the bulk of the Chargers players to play. Now, obviously, if this game gets out of hand, the Chargers can pull back a little bit and they can put some of their key backups in, and hopefully that is the case. So I would hope that the Chargers players who are key players can get out to a big early lead. Hopefully this is kind of like a 27-7, 27-3 kind of situation at halftime. And you can take all of these players that we talked about today, the Pro Bowl players, and say, let's rest you for a little bit. Let's get Foster Sorrell in here. Let's get Eddie Jackson in here. Let's get all these other players in here. Let's get Troy Dye. Let's get Junior Colson. Let's get them all of these reps. Let's get Dean Leonard a bunch of reps. Let's get Kamani Vidal a bunch of reps, etc. So that's what I hope for from the game perspective. I honestly don't really care if the Chargers do end up winning or not if the Steelers win. Obviously, if the Steelers lose, which the Bengals are favored right now, and the vibes around the Pittsburgh Steelers locker room are horrendous. Once the Bengals win, because I'm going to manifest that, the Bengals are going to win. They're going to help the Chargers out. I'm going to manifest that, hopefully. Once the Chargers have to win this game, these are some of the key things that I think will kind of determine and help their cause. So the safety rotation with or without Derwin James, I think is really worth monitoring. The Chargers safety rotation has been quite a disaster in terms of the injuries, in terms of the amount of players who have taken snaps. So they've had 8 players take defensive snaps at safety, including Derwin James. And, after Derwin James, you're talking about Elijah Molden, you're talking about Alohi Gilman, 2 pretty good players, I would say. Then you have Marcus May, Tony Jefferson, Eddie Jackson, AJ Finley, who's now in Seattle, and then Kendall Williamson. Those are all players who have played safety for the Chargers this year, and they just signed Terrell Edmonds to the practice squad. I need somebody to step up and raise their hand and say, in a playoff game, I am going to be a consistent contributor. I am going to be a reliable contributor. And I would think that person is Alohi Gilman, but he's coming back from injury. We don't really know how healthy he is. Is he another player who, if the game gets out of hand, are they going to scale his snaps back because he is coming off of that injury? We don't really know. So, with the Chargers, if their 3-man rotation is Derwin James, Alohi Gilman, and Tony Jefferson, I think I feel okay about that. But Tony Jefferson had a great game against the Falcons, and then we haven't really heard from him much since that point. Eddie Jackson just got to the team. Again, Kendall Williamson, Terrell Edmonds. We don't know who's going to be playing this week. The Chargers need other safeties to step up and play, effective football, especially when you go into a playoff game. So if the Chargers are playing the Baltimore Ravens, for example, they're going to need Derwin James around the line of scrimmage to play against Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, and that Ravens tight end crew, because that's really the only way you're going to be able to stop the Ravens passing attack. If he has to play free safety, then the passing defense is in a much tougher spot. If they're playing the Houston Texans, I'm a little less concerned about that, but they have Dalton Schultz. They have Nico Collins, who plays sometimes in the slot. He's obviously mostly an X player. But you want Derwin James to be able to continue to play around the football. And if they get into a spot where they just don't really trust Eddie Jackson and Tony Jefferson or whoever to play back there alongside Alohi Gilman, and Derwin has to play in the back, I think that's a dicey situation for the Chargers going into a playoff game. They need Derwin in the slot. They need Derwin around the blocks, and the other safeties behind him have to step up. And that includes Alohi Gilman, who was not having his best season before the injury. I thought he's been fine, but we have not really seen the 2023 version of Alohi Gilman this season, in my opinion. So we need Alohi to be back healthy and disruptive and continue to make plays. If the Chargers need to win this game, Derwin James versus Brock Bowers is probably the biggest key matchup of the day. Obviously, Brock Bowers has set multiple rookie records. He's a fantastic tight end already. He's a Pro Bowler. Also, he's probably an all-pro player at the position as well. Derwin James is probably the biggest threat to Brock Bowers that he has seen. He's probably the most difficult matchup that he has seen. And again, if the Chargers do need to win this game, I would expect we see Derwin James against Brock Bowers quite a bit. Brock Bowers plays 54% of his snaps in the slot. He is effectively a big wide receiver. And so I think that translates to a long day for Derwin James in terms of matching up with Brock Bowers. If Derwin James is not able to do that again, and we're talking about Jasir Taylor or somebody else matching up with Brock Bowers, yikes, guys, I'm a little concerned about that. So hopefully we do see the Derwin James matchup. If not, I would expect Brock Bowers to have a pretty big day otherwise with that. Offensively, a couple things here. J.K. Dobbins is 58 yards away from reaching a $150,000 incentive. He is 158 yards away from hitting 1,000 yards on the season. And he did have a very good game in the first Raiders game, but the Raiders defense has played pretty well against the run, even without Max Crosby. So over the last 3 weeks without him, they are 7th in success rate. And like that to me is hard to wrap my brain around because I'm like, Max Crosby is such a good run defender. But they have not missed him that much against the run. So their structure is really sound. They have really good linebacker play. They have sneaky good defensive tackle play, even without Christian Wilkins. So their run defense is pretty strong. On the season, they are 11th in rushing yards per game allowed. So they're not necessarily like an amazing run defense, but they are a pretty good run defense. And again, if the Chargers don't need to win this game, how much do we see J.K. Dobbins touch the football? How much do we see him play? Is that kind of a situation where they're all aware of the 58 yards, he gets 59, and then you pull him? Is something to worth watch. But if the Chargers need to win this game, again, J.K. Dobbins changes the calculus of this Chargers offense. Can he get to 1,000 yards and hit another incentive? I think is probably another question. If the Chargers do need to win this game, I think we probably see JK end up around 65, 70 yards, if I had to guess, just because I do think the Raiders' run defense is really good. He is coming off the injury. Kamani, Hassan Haskins have played pretty well over the last couple of weeks. So I would bet on JK hitting that 58 yards, getting that incentive, because I would imagine everybody knows about it. But I don't know how big of a game the Chargers can have on the ground in response to last week. A much more challenging opponent this week against the Raiders, who weirdly have like stuff to play for now. I don't know. It's a weird vibe. The other aspect that was a little surprising to me of the Raiders defense is that they have been top 5 in dropback, EPA per play, and success rate the last 4 weeks. Again, that is with and without Max Crosby in that stretch. On the season, they're around 15th in both categories. So they are a good pass defense, objectively speaking, across the board. They don't have the most amazing cornerbacks, but at the same time, we know what Jack Jones can do. We know what Nate Hobbs can do. The Maryland corner, I'm totally forgetting his name right now. I guess I can look that up too. Shoot. I was on kind of a roll there a little bit, you guys, and now I'm scrambling. Decamarion Richardson, is that it? No, Jacorian Bennett. Although he's been injured. Jacorian Bennett was the one who I was talking about. Yeah, he's not playing. Okay. That changes things because Bennett was actually pretty good for them. Decamerion Richardson has not been very good for them. So um, Nate Hobbs. Okay, Nate Hobbs is back. He's playing safety this week, though. No, that's weird. He was playing the slot. Okay, Nate Hobbs is back in the slot. Apologies. Okay, so you know what you're getting with Jack Jones. You know what you're getting with Nate Hobbs. Good players. You know what you're getting with Trayvon Merrick. Good safety. How the Chargers go about testing that, is really interesting to watch. I do expect we can see a good game from Ladd McConkey because Nate Hobbs and Jack Jones have been susceptible to double moves. It's kind of like their biggest weakness as players. They're very aggressive after the football. So I would expect we see a good, amount of play action and double moves from the Chargers passing offense to try and exploit the Raiders defense. The last thing, Khalil Mack versus the Raiders is always worth a watch if he plays, how much he plays. He needs 3 sacks to hit 10, which also is an incentive for Khalil Mack. I don't know how much it is. I was not able to find that, but that is something in the contract that Over the Cap has, is that he triggers a bonus, an unknown bonus is what it refers to on Over the Cap if he hits 10 sacks again. So it's a pretty significant number for him to get to 10 overall on the season. Kind of an underrated storyline of the season is that the Chargers have done, I would say, a wonderful job of managing Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa's snaps. So I'm sure this will come up when it comes to free agency. But Khalil Mack is averaging around 42 snaps per game, which is a career low. And that's a very deliberate choice, I think, from the Chargers to, keep him fresh, keep him healthy. And obviously he did miss the 2 games with the double groin injury, but he's going to be very fresh into a playoff game. I'm very curious to see if that changes going forward. How much does Bud Dupree play in a playoff game? That was a lot of alliteration there. So Khalil Mack is not playing as much as we're used to seeing. He's usually around 58, 60 snaps per game under the previous regime and with the Bears and Raiders and all that stuff. But he's around 42 right now this season. And I think we could see that cranked up a bit this week in an effort to make sure he hits that double-digit sack number again. He's had a wonderful time in the past playing against Colton Miller, who I think is a good tackle, but it's just a really, really bad matchup for him against Khalil Mack. So could we see a big-time Khalil Mack performance? Is he a guy that can kind of set the tone early, close the game out late kind of situation? We've seen this time and time again. Khalil Mack always plays well against the Raiders, and I think that will continue this week. All right. If the Chargers need to win this game, I think they will. So I think, again, I think the Bengals are going to beat the Steelers on Saturday. I just don't trust the Steelers and the way that they're playing right now. I don't trust them to stop Joe Burrow, who's playing at a ridiculously high level right now. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, that group. And so I think when it comes Sunday afternoon, I think there's a very, very good chance that we are talking about the 5 seed Los Angeles Chargers, an 11-win season for Jim Harbaugh's first season in LA. And nobody's really talking about him for Coach of the Year, and I understand it. Nobody's really talking about Joe Ortiz for Executive of the Year, and I understand it. But given what this team has gone through from a roster overhaul standpoint and a culture overhaul standpoint, you got to give a major hat tip to those 2 gentlemen. And obviously the players executing and buying into things. 11 wins, 5 seed. It's a heck of a debut for Jim Harbaugh and company. So I cannot wait to see how it unfolds. I feel really, really good about this Chargers team and where they're at. Offensively in particular has really changed over the last couple of weeks. I'm not predicting 40 points this week just because I do think the Raiders defense is pretty good. Rivalry game. Who knows how much the Chargers actually end up having to play for. But I do think the Chargers kind of win this game regardless of who plays. Like I mentioned, I feel like they're going to play the starters at least a half. And I think that's really enough against this Raiders team in this situation where they really want to prove a point and get to that 11-win number, again, regardless of what happens on Saturday night. So predicting wise, going to be a little tricky, but I'm going to go like 27-14 feels fair to me for the Chargers. I just don't think this Raiders team is all that good, although I do think they are good in certain areas. Um, but yeah, I think the Chargers are in a really good spot heading into Sunday, heading into the wild card, and I can't wait to see it, man. All right, that's going to do it for me tonight. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff does help continue to grow the show. If you're in the area again of the Bolt on Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening, go check it out. It seemed like a great time with Karen and Daniel A and all those people who have organized it. Appreciate all of their efforts. So that's going to do it for me. We'll see you guys on Sunday evening for our Chargers Raiders recap. And yeah, appreciate you guys so much. We'll see you then. As always, Bolt up.